It all started with this unassuming entity. It crawled its way into systems in the primitive ages of the internet. And in November 1988, the world would bear witness to one of the first digital atrocities.
The Defense Department, universities, and research centers are still recovering tonight from a computer virus that brought a nationwide network to a standstill.
An email from a student in Berkeley at the University of California read, "In less than 24 hours, the worm had spread to what was roughly 10% of the entire internet at the time, estimated to be 6,000 of 60,000 computers in the entire world, causing significant disruption along the way. Among the victims were Harvard, Stanford, Princeton, Johns Hopkins, and even NASA.
Ignition. Liftoff. Liftoff.
Crafted by a young Robert Morris, this digital creeper would later be famously dubbed the Morris worm. Morris, a student at Cornell University, hadn't intended the chaos that unfolded. His creation was designed as an experiment, not a digital weapon. But what made this worm so effective? Unlike viruses, worms are self-propagating. They autonomously replicate and move from system to system without requiring a host file or human intervention. While viruses can also self-replicate, their spread typically relies on some form of user action. Whether it's opening an infected email attachment, downloading a malicious file, or clicking on a compromised link. Viruses often need that human touch to initiate their spread. This inherent difference gives worms potentially faster and wider reach, allowing them to exploit vulnerabilities across vast networks in record time. The problem with this worm was not that it was malicious by intent, but that it just didn't work as anticipated, a design flaw. According to its creator, it was intended to, first, measure the size of the internet by propagating to as many connected devices as possible. Once the worm infiltrated a computer, it would perform a quick assessment to determine if that system was already infected. If the system was clean, the worm would settle in. Otherwise, it would move on in search of a new host. The worm wasn't just about reckless propagation. It was coded to operate with stealth, ensuring it remained as unobtrusive as possible. Unexpectedly, the check that was meant to determine whether the computer was infected failed. Again and again and again. And in every single device that it infected, it reinfected. Each instance of the worm consumed system resources, culminating in a phenomenon known as resource exhaustion. Essentially, as the number of worm instances increased, they used up a significant portion of the computer's memory and CPU capacity, leading to severe system slowdowns or making the system altogether unresponsive. Having realised the sheer extent of the worm's propagation, panic quickly set in amongst them. Yet amidst the chaos, a few brilliant minds united. With copies of the worm, they began to disassemble and dissect.
Once we had it stopped, we were able to take it apart, sort of like dissect it and tear it apart piece by piece.
Because these three processes right here, these three programs, the S8 with the parens around them, are in fact copies of the virus that are running there.
They were able to identify that the Morris worm worked by exploiting three main vulnerabilities. This was a program used to fetch basic details about a user on a remote machine in the Unix operating system, even personal information such as addresses and phone numbers. However, the flaw in Fingered wasn't about the personal information it provided. Instead, the vulnerability was a buffer overflow. In simplistic terms, by sending a specially crafted request to a machine running Fingered, an attacker could make the machine execute any code they wanted, commonly known as arbitrary code. The Morris worm exploited this to propagate and run its code on target machines. Next was SendMail, a widely used email routing program, the postman of the digital world. The program had what was called a debug mode, usually used by developers and administrators to troubleshoot and fix issues with the mail service. However, the mode also inadvertently allowed for the execution of commands from external sources without any authorization, which is exactly what the Morris worm did. While these vulnerabilities existed, they were not present in every machine. This is where the worm used what is known as a dictionary-based password attack. Users, especially at the time, often chose simple, easily guessable passwords. Common words, names, or even sequential numbers were frequently used. In a dictionary attack, these common passwords are put into a list and tried against the system until it found the correct password. If the worm could guess the password of a user with administrative or elevated rights, it could then perform actions unrestricted on that system, furthering its spread and making its removal more difficult. In recent times, these kinds of attacks are commonly thwarted using a fixed number of failed login attempts and imposing account lockouts. The Morris worm's ingenuity didn't end there. It also adopted a probability-based approach when trying to infiltrate systems. Instead of just mindlessly attacking every system, it assessed the odds. For example, when checking if the computer was already infected, it didn't solely rely on its check mechanism. The worm was programmed to infect a machine with a 1 in 7 chance, even if it believed the machine was already compromised. The point of this was to reduce inaccuracies and complicate efforts of system administrators to contain and stop the worm. Following the worm's spread, the US government established the Computer Emergency Response Team, or CERT. This team was set up to address vulnerabilities in the internet ecosystem and ensure that a similar incident wouldn't cripple the internet again. Today, various CERTs worldwide work around the clock to protect against cyber threats. The US Government Accountability Office estimated that the Morris worm caused damages in the range of 100,000 to 10 million, with each installation costing between 200 to 53,000. Robert Tappan Morris became the first person to be convicted under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. His trial spotlighted the challenges of dealing with digital misconduct and set a precedent for subsequent cases. He was not arrested, but sentenced to 3 years of probation, 400 hours of community service, and fined just over $10,000. The aftermath of the Morris worm not only changed the course of Morris's life, but also served as a stark wake-up call in the world of computing and cybersecurity. In the years following the Morris worm incident, Robert Tappan Morris took a different path. He co-founded the Y Combinator startup incubator and became an influential figure in the tech industry, despite his early experiment casting a long shadow and an almost indelible mark in the realm of cybersecurity.